Greetings and welcome back to the Old Ways Rising Farm YouTube channel, where we're very clearly not at our normal Old Ways Rising farm. We are at the farm where I grew up, my parents' farm, and I want to look at a stone wall that I built about 10 years ago. And this will illustrate the concepts that we're going to discuss here in this series of videos on the mechanics of building stone retaining walls, where we actually build a stone retaining wall to create a raised bed garden. This series of videos is going to be about the mechanics of the wall, not about how to design and think through different styles of raised bed gardens, right? That'll be separate. We'll get there. We'll do a raised bed garden concepts video here along the way. But this series is about the mechanics of laying the stone wall itself, okay? This wall was built with the same set of principles that I'm going to use for the wall that will be part of this video series. Now, this is all dry laid. There's no mortar here. Stone walls move. Ground moves. Ground slides downhill over time. It always does. Archaeologically, if you know where something was 100 years ago, you always have to adjust for that, right? You have to refine it 100 years later, 200 years later, 300 years later, because ground moves downhill. The ground moves up and down with frost heave. The colder the climate, the more it moves up and down with frost heave. But there's always some seasonal movement. In dry climates, the ground will move up and expand in the wet season and then compress again in the dry season, right? So there's always breathing up and down of ground. So you have to design for that. You can do that either with the brute force approach of excavating large amounts of material from underneath your wall and filling it with gravel that doesn't transmit that force as much, or you can do it a gentler, simpler way of just simply designing a wall that's sufficiently flexible that it can move with the ground. And that is the real advantage of dry laid stone. It's flexible. These big heavy goobers can move up and down and shift, and they'll just find their spot, okay? So a wall never stays quite exactly where you put it. But that's okay as long as we design for that. If I take this level and set it up here so it's nice and plumb against this wall. There we go. Okay. You can see I've got about fist and a thumb from the top. Okay? From the top to the level. When this wall was built, it was pretty much completely plumb. The front face was pretty much completely plumb. So it has shifted backwards. That's exactly what we want to have happen. Okay? It's going to shift one way or the other. It's not going to stay exactly where you put it. So you want it to shift backwards into the soil, because it can only compress the soil so much, and then the forces are going to reach an equilibrium state. Once that happens, it'll move up, it'll move down, it'll move up, it'll move down, but it's not going to move sideways. So it will stay here for a very, very long time. The only stone that has shifted truly out of position in this stone wall is two over there at the end where they got hit with a lawnmower. And that's beyond the design parameters of the stone wall that you're going to make, right? So don't do that. It's bad for the stone wall, it's bad for the lawnmower. So if we look at this again, the bottom stone here in the master course, the face is still pretty much dead true. The level's right up against it, almost perfectly flush. And then each one has shifted backwards ever so slightly. Okay? This is much straighter than the true natural angle of repose, but it has this back shift. And it's found that back shift on its own. We do that by laying it with an initial structure which is going to guarantee that the direction the rocks shift is in, leading to a strong wall, and not out, leading to a pile of rubble in a decade. That's sad. You put a lot of work into your wall, you don't want a rubble pile in a decade, right? You want something that you're going to be proud of and looks like it has been here for a century and not just a decade. So let's go do it. Before we start actually building the wall for the raised bed, I want to talk a little bit about the stone that we're going to use. I very much recommend that you buy local stone. Wherever you are, find the closest stone to you to use for your stone wall construction. A couple reasons for this. One is replaceability. If you build something today and you're using some rare imported material and you decide to build another one next year, you may or may not be able to source it again. Also, using local material makes what you're doing anchored in place. It fits. It will match not just what you build next year, but it will match what your neighbors built last year and what your ancestors built a generation ago, and it will look like it fits in place. Here where I am, we're pretty much on a moraine. This is an area where the glaciers terminated, so all of our ledge rock is buried very, very deep and inaccessible, and most of the quarries around are glacial till. That means that the majority of the rock that comes up locally is the large stuff that has been removed from sand pits, and it's all fairly rounded. That's okay as long as we meet a couple of criteria. I want to show you first what you can't use to build. These are junk. Okay? These are junk. These are not building rocks. You will see strolling around the suburbs many cases where people took these and took stone that is just plain not stackable, tried to stack it and glue it together with mortar. But mortar is not glue. If you have not already watched the Chalk Talk video that I did on how to build a dry laid wall that will actually stay up, I'll put a link here at the top of the screen. Pause this and go watch that. The rest of what comes will make more sense if you have that background. So mortar is not glue. You cannot take round cobbles and glue them together with a whole bunch of mortar and expect the wall to stay up, right? These are not usable because they don't have any large, reasonably accessible flat faces, right? They are round. There's no way that you're going to stack these things together that's going to really work. Yeah, that has a sort of flat face, but even there, it's not really flat, right? So these igneous cobbles tend to be trash, okay? So we're going to get rid of them. They're trash because they're too round and they're too small. You want all of your rocks to be 50, 80 pounds, or the majority of your rocks to be 50, 80 pounds, up to 100, 150 pounds. You want big rock to build a wall that stays. Another temptation of people that don't do a whole lot of this is to try to pick rock that is easy to handle. But the sad truth is, the easier your stone is to handle, the easier the wall is to fall over. That just physics says so. So you want large rocks. So those are too round and too small. Now let's look at this one. This is about a 50-pounder. So this guy is large enough to be a good stable building rock, but look at how pathetically terrible its shape is, right? There's not a consistent flat plane, let alone a right angle mating surface anywhere in this monstrosity. So yeah, this is a nice 50-pound rock, and if it was a different shape, it would be good. But it ain't a different shape, so it also goes on the junk pile. We don't want him. Now let's look at this one. This one's smaller, but there are room for some small rocks, especially in the base. Again, go pause this and watch the earlier video. You'll understand quickly why with the retaining wall I am going to put smaller rocks as the foundation and bigger rocks up above. It has to do with getting it to lean into the ground that it's pressing against. But all of that geometry is covered in an earlier video. But if we look at this, this is a smaller rock, but it has a nice flat surface. It's reasonably thick, but the other surface is rounded. Okay? So if I just show you against this other one, that's roly-poly. That won't stack that way. But this is a nice, durable, flat mating surface. Okay? So this is usable, but it's only usable in two locations. It's not a universally usable rock. You can use it as a foundation stone in a retaining wall, and you can use it as a top stone, a capper. Okay? So if you're using it as a capstone, it's exactly like this. You put it on top of another stone that it's going to mate nice with, and because it's the top, it doesn't matter that it's got some texture or some curvature in the top surface, because nothing else will be stacked above it. These are nice for adding interest to your capstones. Obviously for a capstone I want a larger one, but this geometry is nice for capstones because it adds interest to the surface that you view, and it's nice for transitions. So this spiral garden is going to transition up. So I will be looking for rocks that have some angle to them or some curvature to help those angle rises go up nicely and not just look like stair steps. So they can be very nice for that. Now, other than a capstone, I said you can use it for a base stone. Well, the base stones, we're going to dig into the ground a little bit, loosen it up, and then work this in. Okay? And in working it in, that texture on the bottom will help it grab and anchor. Okay? If you look archaeologically, a lot of pots have tapered bases or round bases. They would never sit on a shelf, but they weren't intended to sit in a shelf. Those shapes sit better than flat on an uneven surface. So when you have like some sort of large amphora that's going to go in a room with a dirt floor, you can just loosen some of that soil and jam it in and it'll sit. You know, that they were never intended to sit on shelves, right? Same thing here. The rocks that are going to sink into the ground and not mate with another rock, but mate with the earth itself, I'm going to deliberately go out of my way to select ones that have some sort of surface texture on the bottom, because it will make them more stable. Mm-hmm. So this is good for top or for bottom, but it can't be a middle. Okay? The rock that is going to be a good middle is this fella. This guy's probably 80 pounds or so. And if you look, if I point him right at the camera here, we have a nice flat surface on this side, a nice flat surface. There's some hardened dirt on it, but that'll come off. Nice flat surface on this side, nice even thickness. And this is the type of rock that you want for the majority of your wall. Okay? So you want to select rock well. I go to a local gravel pit and they sort out the big stuff, and I'll just pick through it and pick the ones that look like decent building rock and set them out on a pile. This is about 1.5 tons of rock that I have here, and it probably won't be enough for this one garden bed. So you do need a lot of rock. For any raised bed of any size, you're talking 2 to 5 tons of rock for that sort of construction. You're going to be amazed at just how small a ton of rock actually is when you go by it for the first time. It sounds like a big measurement, but rocks are a big heavy, right? They're very, very dense, and your ton never gets you as much bulk as you really wish it would. So this is the third reason for buying local rock, because you don't want to pay shipping on 5 tons of something that came from across the world. It's just going to jack up the prices. You want to be able to get this stuff inexpensively so you can build lots of awesome things for your homestead. All that being said, let's go and let's start setting some foundation stones over here in the raised bed. So here's the bed. Now, as you can see, I've already done a little bit of layout and some rock choosing before starting to take the video. I'll give you the backstory. How I did the layout was, first I took just some pieces of firewood to mark a diameter, just 4 points around that would kind of define the edge of the circle. I'm going to do more beds over this way, so I wanted to lay out several all at once and just make sure the basic size would work at a very, very crude level. That was step one. Then I came and I started getting some rock, and I chose the pieces that would be good foundation stones. Okay? So again, flat face, rounded face, right? This one was pretty rounded, but it broke, so that gives me a flat face, rounded face. This one has 2 flat faces, still okay, right? This one, 2 flat faces, still okay. and I'm picking smaller rocks. Again, I'm referencing the earlier video. The next layer I want to be able to overhang, right? So that every layer is going to get wider and grow toward the middle so it leans in. Because of that, I don't want to start out super wide here in the first course, or I'm going to end up with a scenario where I get so wide at the top that I've eaten up all of my garden space. That would be sad, right? I want a garden, not just a rock monolith. Building a monolith would be a totally different procedure and purpose, right? So, after laying out the overall garden areas just by chucking some pieces of firewood and looking at the general sizes, I chose these rocks and I just set them loosely around and then stood back and, okay, the circle doesn't look quite right here or doesn't look quite right there, so I fix it and then stand back again. Cycle, rinse, repeat until I had a circle that I could walk all the way around and looked like a nice, happy circle, at least to the naked eye. It doesn't have to be perfect. This is not a major engineering job. This is a garden that I want to look nice and look natural and organic to the human eye, right? Therefore, the human eye is my measuring tool. I did, of course, use a surveyor's tape to get the basic dimensions and make sure they'd all fit in the overall plan here, a plan that will take several years to create. But after that, the layout was just done by eye. I'm okay with some irregularities. When this is done, I want it to look like it's been here 100 years. So I'm okay with some irregularities. That'll just give it a little bit of character. If you want to take this up a notch and make sure it's super regular, a little less organic, a little more specific and contrived, then you would take the tape and measure it, 3 feet and measure your diameter. Then step 3 feet to the side and measure your diameter. Like mark the middle and just keep going around, or get a rope. You can also get a rope and get a spray can. Put a stake in the middle, put a loop of the rope around it, and just walk around with the spray can and use it like a compass. And then you'll have a very precise circle. So it depends on what sort of aesthetic you're going for. I'm going for cottage garden, very organic looking, right? So I was doing it with some approximate measurements and then eyeball layout. You do not have to do that. There are other ways that are just as legitimate. Now, once I had all of the stones in here, and a couple of them, till I get them set, they'll get moved around a little bit, and I may have an extra, I may need an extra. But we basically have the stones where they're going to be. So I'm going to come over a section here, roll the stones off, grab a shovel, and just very simply skim the sod off. You can see we are really dry right now, which is part of why we're doing construction projects and not anything real active in the garden. Now, just again with the tip of the shovel, I want to loosen up the top inch or so. Just get nice loose soil. Now I'm going to come and get my next stone, pick the flattest surface and the longest direction. So if I look at it, this is very flat. This is a little bit, has convexity into it. So this will dig into the soil well. This will support a rock well. Now I could set it in this way with the long direction, the length of the wall, or that way. Because this is the bottom course, and I want the wall to lean inward, I'm going to put long direction, the long direction of the wall. If this was the next course, I would put it this way so that it would overlap the preceding course. Okay? And then that's going to give me my overlap and my back lean. but we're not there. So I'll put it in, and then just wiggle it down until it's good and solid. Then just kind of arrange the soil around it a little bit so that it grabs in nice. Grab the next one. Actually, both these surfaces are a little bit flat, but this one's a little triangular. It's a little fat here and a little thin here. Okay. So when I wiggle this in, again, this is the long direction, so this will go the length of the wall. When I wiggle this one in, I will keep the nose up and wiggle it down a little bit to compensate for that. Again, you can cheat like this on the bottom course. Okay. So wiggle him in there nice. Okay. Good and flat. He's happy. Next stone. Flat, rounded. Again, a little bit triangular, so I'm going to set the back down a little bit extra. Okay, wiggle him in. Now, I need to adjust these a little bit. This kind of comes in on me a little bit, and I'm going to need to move some more soil here. So I'll do that off camera, but you get the idea of what I'm doing. I'm just going to cut out a little bit. There we go. Actually, I lied. I'll do that right on camera. There we go. And that's a little bit better. So you just play with it, get them to describe the curve you want. And then when you're all the way around this course, go, get yourself a drink of tea, come back out, sip your tea, walk around it a couple times and make sure it's the way you want it. Just like if you've seen any of my wood carving videos, I'll always talk about make sure that step 1 is correct, true, and perfect before you advance to step 2. When you move on to the next step, any preceding errors will be magnified. They will not be remedied. Mm-hmm. So if you see a rock that looks out of place, you don't like the curvature, you think it got a little squatty, fix it before you move on. Mm-hmm. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and do this. I'm going to set the rest of these stones, and then we will join together again, and in the next segment of this video, lay the next course. If you like this garden and you like how this video is going, why don't you go ahead and give it a thumbs up so YouTube will know it's awesome and other people can look at it. So I'm going to get back to work, and in mere moments we will join together again. Okay, so all of these stones are set down in. This is the foundation course, and I started working toward actually turning this into a raised bed by putting these pallet covers down and starting the sheet mulch in here. This will smother down the grass on the inside, and this soil is going to be built up quite high, so we'll get a very good smother. This grass won't be a problem. Also, to move the ball a little bit in terms of filling it, all of the sod that I dug up from underneath these rocks is thrown into the middle and is also underneath the sheet mulch. So the next course is often called the master course. It'll be laid to tie all of these stones together and start building up. And we will tackle that in the next video because it's about to rain on us. So, I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you go ahead and give it a thumbs up, and we will see you next time at Old Ways Rising Farm.